This is a step-by-step guide to candidate research. Thanks for joining me. My name is Missy Bender, and I'm with Raise Your Hand Texas. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan education advocacy organization. Let's get started. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to answer this question with confidence. How do I evaluate candidates to become an informed voter? I see two parts to answering this question. The path to becoming an informed voter starts with part one, researching the issues, followed by part two, following the money. I feel like most of us have a pretty good handle on part one, researching the issues. We can kind of understand that, but part two, it's a little elusive. So by the end of this presentation, I hope to show you some tools so that you can dig in and do both parts with confidence. But let's start with part one, researching the issues. Well, first of all, we probably ought to identify the candidates. Who's running? What's on my ballot? Then now that we know that, dig a little deeper, take a look at the candidate's website, their social media, hold on to the direct mail that you receive, and ask yourself some of these questions. What's the background of the candidates? Why are they running? What are their positions, especially on the things that matter to you? What do they care about? How do they interact with other people online? And who else is supporting them for this office? Could be individuals, it could be organizations. And the third part is taking a look at their responses to written questionnaires. Did they respond to an organization's questionnaire? Did they participate in nonpartisan candidate forums? And how did the candidate respond to the issues that matter to you? We'll begin with identifying who is running in each race. And to do that, I've presented three nonpartisan options here. There may be others, but these are just three. Any one of them will work for your purposes. The first one is League of Women Voters, followed by Ballotpedia and the Dallas Morning News Voter Guide. The nice feature of each of these options, and I've given you the source where you can find each of these connections on the web, you will enter information about where you live, where are you registered, which is going to be your home address. And based upon that, the system will present to you all of the races that you will find on your ballot and all of the candidates who have filed for that office. So for purposes of example, I'm going to use the League of Women Voters option and show you what that looks like so that you can repeat this process for yourself. Each option, as I mentioned, offers you personalized information based upon your address. So on the League of Women Voters website, which is vote411.org, it looks like this. When you arrive at that website, you'll put in your information and you will receive a screen that looks like this. So on the left-hand side is what they're calling the voter guide, and it lists all of the races that will be presented on your ballot. I put in my home address and it says in small letters, your guide has 27 races. Click one to get started. So I've only got one screenshot here, but when you scroll further down, I have picked the race based upon where I live, which is District 66. So when you make that selection by clicking the blue option over here that says make selection, you're presented with a new screen that is the voter guide for that particular race. So at the top, you'll get a little information about how long is this term. This happens to be a 2-year term, so individuals, incumbents and candidates can run every 2 years. We can see there are 3 people who have filed for this particular race: Sharon Hirsch, Sean Jones, and Matt Shaheen. So you can then from this point, select candidates 2 at a time whose responses you would like to compare to one another. I picked Sharon Hirsch and Matt Shaheen for this purpose. So once you make that selection, you will find at the top of the screen biographical information side by side for each one. Their education, work experience, their candidate website, some social media presence, and the ability to reach out by email or phone or mail if you so wish. So that's some helpful information. You'll want to make note of that because we're going to go check out some of the social media sites next. Since I represent an education organization and it's very important to me, I took a look at and I'm showing you here the candidate responses to the education question that the League of Women Voters presented to both candidates. You can see that there is a response for each candidate. That means both of them have submitted feedback to answer the organization's question. So you can read the responses from each candidate. You can look at the other topics that are on that questionnaire as well. And in fact, I've given you the League of Women Voters website here. You can do the same with Ballotpedia and with Dallas Morning News because some of the questionnaire content is going to vary. And that just gives you a chance to see a broader array of feedback from candidates. So here are some of the organizations near me that I know of that provide questionnaire opportunities to candidates. We've talked about the Dallas Morning News. I live in Plano, so I've got the Plano Chamber here. If you live in another community, you might check their chamber website to see if they also present same opportunities. Vote 411. We've talked about that as League of Women Voters. USA Facts is a nonpartisan organization that does the same thing at the national level. So for US Senate and congressional positions and such, all those federal positions, you will find content for them there. And then Collin County Votes, which is another nonpartisan organization that provides questionnaire opportunities. So there, and I've got mental illness, NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. So these are just a few resources that I identified for you. Now, we're going to take a look at some of the candidate websites and social media. So just for purposes of example, since we started with these two candidates, we'll just continue the process. You can do the same with your candidates for any race. So on the left side, we have Matt Shaheen, the candidate, the Republican candidate and incumbent, and on the right side is Sharon Hirsch, the Democratic candidate, that are both running for this seat. Take a look at what content each candidate provides to you through their website. You can see for Matt, for instance, you can take a look at his background so you can meet him. You can find out what his positions are on the issues, volunteer for his campaign, contact him, or contribute money. On Sharon's website, we have the options of learning about her, finding out her position on issues, so you should compare those two to one another, finding out who's endorsing her, persons and organizations, testimonials from people, how to support her, how to vote, where to vote, and information on COVID-19. So I think that's some useful information to add to your database of study that you are undertaking. Let's take a look at social media posts. I happened to pick just one day and use that same day, and I just screenshotted all of the postings on Twitter. This doesn't include Facebook, so this is just an example for you on October 5th. So on this slide, we can see what candidate Sharon Hirsch talked about on her Twitter feed that day. It happened to be World Teachers Day, so we see a posting about that. We see something about voter registration, the pandemic, and an endorsement from an education group. Let's take a look at the next set of examples from the other candidate in the race, which is Matt Shaheen. So we see an example of an endorsement from the Municipal Police Association, a celebration of World Teachers Day as well, an advertisement for an education update event that he's participating in, support from an organization called Texas Values Action, and an endorsement from DFW-PAC. It's a political action committee in the Asian American organization. And then the last one here is a discussion on ending racial division on Facebook Live. So you could just take a look at what the candidates are posting and how they interact in their responses, also with the people who interact with them, because that can be telling and informative too. Continuing into the research category, or the research department, you can watch a nonpartisan candidate forum. In my community, these are some examples of organizations who are nonpartisan and present nonpartisan candidate forum opportunities, either in person, in some cases in the past, or in my experience now, they're all virtual. I've hosted a few forums and had several other partners work on that with me, and some of these other organizations have hosted their own, or they'll present an opportunity for candidates to respond to questions on video. So all of that is very helpful as you're doing your research. So that kind of wraps up that part one that we talked about, researching the issues. Let's move on to part two, following the money. Before I jump in, I'll just say, why is following the money important? It will allow one to understand the sources of support that are funneling in to a candidate, because it is likely that there is, those individuals have done their research on part one and they have found alignment, perhaps, and they are now trying to help the candidate get elected. So we're going to start with some basics, and then we'll get a little bit, we'll build up from the basics to the more complex. I think it's important to understand that there is a schedule that all candidates must adhere to when it comes to providing transparency to their campaign finance dealings. So in the current world, we're in November right now, and we are approaching the general election on November 3rd. The required filings from candidates are October 5th, which is the 30th day before the November 3rd election, and October 26th. So these are the two windows into the finances of a campaign that are closest to the election itself. I'm going to show you where you go find this information, and you're going to learn about their contributions, their expenditures, how much money they have on hand, and any loans they have taken out. The October 5th date is the first time really that everyone around Texas, or really the United States, gets a chance to see they get a peek into that campaign for the first time. Okay, so there are three sources that I'm going to point you to. The first one is the Texas Ethics Commission, and this is the location where all state level candidates, not local candidates, so I'm not talking about school board or city council, but legislative offices and state level offices file their reports to the Texas Ethics Commission directly. And you will be able to find out who's giving money to the campaign, how many people, how much are they giving, how much has the candidate raised in this a certain window of time, how much have they spent, how much do they have left, and have they borrowed any money to finance them. So this is the raw data input receptacle, and you can view the information in a PDF form, or you can download it into an Excel spreadsheet. The second source I'm going to show you is from the Texas Tribune, which is a nonprofit online news organization based in Austin. And they have a reporter who is tracking the data from the Ethics Commission for some key races. So it's just a summary. It's a helpful tool to give you an overview of what's happening in the state, and you can compare and contrast. The third one is it's called Chris Tackett Now, and this is a graphic representation of downloaded data that came from the Texas Ethics Commission for state level races and the Federal Election Commission for federal races. And the data is presented in graphical fashion so that it is turned into information, and you can look at relationships more easily. So let's begin now with what happens if you use this website. I've given you the source here, or you can just Google the source, to the Ethics Commission. So when you search on campaign finance, simple search, you can enter the name of the filer, so the name of the candidate, and you need to know the legal name. So for instance, my last name is Bender, my first name, my nickname is Missy. You may put in Bender and Missy, and you may find that I filed my report in that way, but if you don't see me, if you don't see a report that comes up with that name, then you would probably know, okay, she's probably filed by a different given name, which would be Melissa. So you'd put in Bender, Melissa, and then you would see if that worked. You can search by filer name, treasurer name, but in this case, we're searching by filer name. All right, so once you do that and you have found the individual candidate you're looking for, then you click on the PDF option, because you're presented with two. One is PDF, one is CSV for downloading the data so that you can manipulate it. I've selected PDF because I want to show you what the report looks like. This is the second page of the report. The first page just tells you who the candidate is, what their address is, so forth, who their treasurer is. The main thing I want to show you is that if you look in the middle, you can see political contributions of $50 or less. So if someone gives $30 to a candidate, the candidate does not have to report the name of that individual that submitted it. A lot of times they do, but it's not necessary. In this particular category, this would be the sum total of all of those contributions. Then on the second line, you would have all of the named contributions. We're going to look at examples of that, the total, and then you add line 1 and 2, and you'd have line 3. I'm sorry, not line 3. Line 3 is expenditures. So this is really the summary data for this particular individual. In this, I kind of got these two slides backwards, but this particular slide shows you that PDF example, whoops, goodness, the PDF example and the CSV. So the values on the right side of this page, the summary, came from that report that we looked at right here. However, this is a different candidate, so the numbers don't match up. but this is what this is what the screen looks like. And this particular example here tracks to the one that I just showed you. Okay, so for this particular candidate, page 1, just some biographical information. Page 2 is the summary information. And here is the detail that works together to formulate the summary that we just looked at a second ago. So on Schedule A1, A1 represents all individual political contributions made to this candidate when they happened. And you can see, you also have to collect the occupation and the employer in certain conditions, but that's not presented necessarily to, I can see it in some examples, but not in others here. So you can see who is giving money to this candidate. We have a political action committee in this example, an individual, another political action or two, and another individual. So you can tell how much they're giving when they gave it. On the right-hand side, it looks very similar to the left, but it's different because this is Schedule F1, which are the political expenditures. So these are purchases made against these contributions. So in this example, this individual has spent $428 for insurance, $2,200 for a campaign expense, and $500 for a donation to a Colin Strong committee, political committee. So this comes directly, this is the data that comes from the candidate and will form the basis of all of the other analysis that I'm going to show you. So I just wanted you to understand what it looks like and where it comes from. The Texas Tribune, that nonprofit online news organization in Austin that tracks all the Austin politics and such. This is a snapshot of the spreadsheet that this reporter put together. And he has chosen certain races and is comparing and contrasting the campaign report values that are submitted by the candidates so that you can kind of get a statewide view of how much money is coming in to a race and a candidate and who has raised more. Just an overview. You can't change the information, but you can view it, and I've provided this source at the bottom of this slide. Okay, so we understand where the data comes from. We know how to find it, but you might not want to download the data and manipulate it yourself. That takes a lot of work, and that's a skill set that not everybody has. A few years ago, an individual named Chris Tackett, he is a former school board member in Granbury. This quote comes from his website. He says he started digging around into the Texas campaign finance reports in December of 2017. He found information that was very surprising to him, and he began to share what he had found on social media. With the initial shock wearing off and feedback from others that said they were also surprised by what they saw, he discovered that there were a handful of families that were spending a lot of money in certain races. So he decided if he could make campaign finance a bit easier for the rest of us to understand. So he has this website called Chris Tackett Now. Again, the source is at the bottom. And he tracks campaign finance from individuals to political action committees and candidates. On the right-hand side, you can see the sorts of information that you can just select any of these buttons here and do some investigation. If this is of interest to you, you just search on Chris Tackett now and you just play around with his website. I'm going to show you some screenshots of a few things that he has put together to give you a feel for what information you can learn. So let's start with simply all contributions to all Senate candidates. Now there are two chambers in the Texas legislature, the Senate and the House. The Senate has fewer members, the House has a lot of members. So for this election cycle, and senators do not run every 2 years like House reps do, so there are fewer of them running right now. For this cycle, whose time period is July 1 to September 24, and you can play with that time window, make it whatever you want it to be, we can see that the total amount of donations to all persons running for Senate seats was $3.9 million. Next to that pie chart, you can see in descending order from the highest individual making contribution or PAC making contribution, it is in descending order. And so this is like the top 10 right here that are demonstrated by color. Those same names, Tim Dunn, Texans for Lawsuit Reform, and so forth, you can see in the third chart, which is really in the middle of the page, how much each one gave. And you can scroll through the little arrow. It says 1 to 10 out of 2,965. So there were 2,965 contributors to all campaigns. This is the sum total. And you can see in descending order who's given the most. And you can do research on who these individuals are and who these political action committees are so that you can understand what their priorities are. And then you can begin to associate their priorities with the priorities of the candidates that they are supporting. On the third column of information, you can see the geography that shows you where are the contributions coming from. So the top one shows you the value, total value by all contributions from that geography. So in this case, the majority of all contributions are coming from Midland. In the bottom case, you have individual by count contributors. So how many contributors are coming from these geographies? So that's just another way of looking at information. All right, taking a look, let's go back over to the pie chart on the left. Let's break it down a little bit further. The number of contributions is 3,686, but the number of contributors is less than that. It's 2,965. The average contribution a little over $1,000 and the median at $75. So this is an all picture. Let's look at the House for a minute. This is another piece of information that shows you ranked contributions to all House candidates. So if you look at on the left side, all candidates in House races during this time window, July 1 to September 24, this is in descending order. What candidates, how much have they received from most to least? So in this case, during this time period, it was Lorenzo Sanchez, having received $700,000 with an average contribution value of $50, coming from a total of 12,671 contributors or contributions. I can't read the total. So I think I can't read those columns. So I don't know which one is contributions and which one is contributors. So this is interesting by candidate, and you can kind of compare and contrast around the state, kind of what's going on. On the right-hand side are not the candidates, but the contributors themselves. Who has given the most to Texas House races? In this case, it is Texans for Lawsuit Reform, a political action committee. And you can, again, at the bottom, scroll through with using the arrows at the bottom to look at the following pages. You can look up these organizations and find out, again, what they care about and who they're giving to. let's look at the contributions, the ranked contributions to each candidate, but this is by party. So in the top example, we're staying with the Texas House in this case, we can see that the Republican candidate receiving the most contributions in that time window is Sarah Davis on the Republican side and Lorenzo Sanchez on the Democrat side. Again, you can scroll through on either one to see how the candidates that you're looking at are ranking with other candidates around Texas. It's just another piece of information. Let's look at now all contributions to one particular candidate. So this chart format looks like the first one that we saw, that was all contributions to Senate candidates. This is all contributions to one. Okay, in this case, for this candidate, starting with the pie chart on the left, we have a political, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The top 5 or 6 are organizations, and then that is followed by an individual and an organization. So you can look at the values that they gave under the chart that says contributor name. And again, looking at where they came from geographically, what the average contribution is, what the median is, and how many contributors there were during that time period. Okay, let's take a look now at a particular House district, and let's compare the two candidates in their contributions received. Let's compare them one to another. So in this case, this is a Denton County example here, and the Republican candidate during this time period has 234 contributors and has raised $269,000, and the Democrat for that race has 885 contributors and $200,000 in contributions for that time period. You can see the organizations that are in ranked order for the top contributors. And he gives a definition of grassroots donors as those giving $200 or less. So by his definition, he's saying a large donor is anyone giving more than $200. So you can see how many contributors and contributions fall in those categories. Let's take a look at the midterm elections. So this was 2018 to today, 2020. So House races, as I mentioned, happen every 2 years. So in this comparison, we're looking at all of the, I've broken this example down by party. So you have the Republican election cycle on the top for 2018, and let me back up. The entire 2018 election cycle is on the top chart, and the entire 2020 election cycle is on the bottom chart. So this is how we want to look at this. During 2018, the data tracked 91 in 18 Democratic candidates and 100 Democratic candidates in the current election cycle, and 89 Republicans tracked and 96 this cycle. In terms of campaign contributors, on the Democratic side, there were 5,900 contributors in the 18 election cycle, and there are 51,000 in the 20 election cycle. On the Republican side, there were 4,200 in the 18 cycle, and there are 6,300 in the 20 election cycle. The contributions in 2018 to Democrats were 3.1 million versus 11 million in the current cycle, and 5.6 million to Republicans in the 18 cycle, and 12 million in the current cycle. You can look at the same information by House district. I've chosen this example simply because the candidates in both cycles were the same. So these two candidates ran for the same seat in 18, and they're running for the same seat again in 20. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic that you can compare. So let's take a look at the purple figures. In the upper chart for 18, there were 95 contributors to the Democrats' campaign, and in the current cycle, there are 6,700. In the 18 cycle, there were 13 contributors to the Republican, and in the current cycle, there are 89. Let's look at the dollars. In the 18th cycle, there were $22,000 contributed to the Democrat, and this cycle there are 417,000. And to the Republican, there were $87,000 collected in the 18th cycle, and now there are 253,000 in contributions to the Republican in the 20 cycle. So it basically takes all of these charts help one to understand the relation, how all of the information all the data comes together to create information so that you can compare and contrast and learn. If you take the time to learn about the issues, that's the part one, that a candidate cares about and the source of their funding, both of those together are very important steps in becoming an informed voter. This takes a little time. It gets easier with time, but I believe that you will feel more confident in your decisions based upon the information that you have researched and discovered, and it will hopefully allow you to pose questions to candidates based on what you have discovered so that you can learn even more and hopefully develop relationships with the candidate and the office holder. Again, I'm Missy Bender with Raise Your Hand Texas. I thank you for taking the time to empower yourself by becoming an informed voter. The election day is Tuesday, November 3rd. So between now and then, you still have time to do your homework. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. If you would like to reach out to me, you can find my contact information here. Maybe you want to take a screenshot of it and reach out. Also, we'd love to have you follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter where we can connect with you and offer information about the legislative session as it gets closer. So my screen is messing up, but thank you again for your time. Have a great day.